Okay. What do we got? How many people we got in? Yeah, I figure give a few people a few more minutes. I don't see a ton of people yet. And I think the main talk is still going on too. I also learned one other thing. It was definitely a case of the other plates I have because I've got some Office applications running up. I'm also running Edge, and that definitely was not working. Richard and Maureen, welcome. We'll give people a few more minutes after the close of the other session, and then we'll kick things off. We'll give it another couple minutes here. Hello, Jeff. I see you come in. Thank you. Bert, thank you. Appreciate it. So I think we have a few people trickling in here from the remnants of the end of the last session. So I'll give a couple more minutes, and then I'm going to kick things off. All right, then. It's given 3 minutes past the hour here, so Good afternoon, everybody. Steve, you want to anything you want to throw in before we get going? In that case, I will get myself going. Everybody can hear me loud and clear. I'm going to use the chat and use the polls as well, which you can see over on your right. I'm just checking. We had some audio issues earlier. Okay, perfect. And in that case, I'm going to get going. Welcome, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is healthy and safe, and I wish you the same for you and your families. We're going to cover a lot about local agency asset management, what it means in the city of Philadelphia, some of the efforts we've taken on, and in addition, some of the recent efforts that we've taken on respective of COVID-19 and emergency management that I think are really uh, relevant to today. So, I'm going to go ahead and share screen here. All right. So, good afternoon. Like I said, we're talking about today delivering on asset management, why the city of Philadelphia relies on its asset management systems in times of crisis. We're going to cover a few things: COVID-19, and also possibilities of flooding. And this is how we handle our asset intelligence. Why our applications called IWAMs and Envision work, and yet we'll look into the future. And just as importantly, why it's important for COVID-19 and other emergencies in the future. So, why asset intelligence? Simple. City should know where its assets are and how much it spends on them. One of the key issues that many cities are facing and don't often adequately address is the concept of not just where things are, we all know where things are, but how much the city spends on it. And not just in the case of, oh, we spent, so much per year, or we spend so much on gas, but as a means of drawing comparisons to assets of a similar nature. Why are we spending what we're spending there as opposed to somewhere else? And sometimes there's perfectly legitimate reasons. Certain assets need certain kinds of operating and capital work that other assets, even if they're in a similar classification, don't. But that's an important part to know. It's not just knowing where the assets are, how much they spend, but rather the whole reason why spending is critical to that asset and what kind of spending is done. So you need a central repository for basic information for the capital budget, work orders, operating expenditures. And I know for the past 10 years that various cities and various vendors and private companies have said, well, we need this sort of central repository. But I think a lot of people get in the concept of the data silo or the gigantic data warehouse, where a person who is knowledgeable goes ahead and gets that information and then they bring it out for you. And while that's all well and good, it still relies a lot on having that silo. In this case, it's not so much the data as it is the person. Who's your asset intelligence officer? Who's your asset manager? And that slows things down, especially because asset intelligence and what an asset is and how you spend on it is evolving. We're no longer just looking up hard asset data, although that's important. We're trying to figure out what to do some predictive analysis, to come up with new ways to use our data in a way that's more reflective of not just current needs, but also predicting current needs, not just in your normal situations, but in your emergency situations as well. That's why just having a central repository, while absolutely critical, and you should have good, clean, well done data for a central repository, doesn't mean that's the only thing you're going to be using it for or how you're going to be using it. It's far more important to be able to do something with the data that leads to smart decision making. And this, I can't stress it enough. The city, when it came into the asset intelligence sort of market 10 years ago, it became important and understandable that it's something that you need to reflect on is not just knowing where things are, but rather utilizing that knowledge. And the data, the city should be able to gather, organize, display, and report this data. That means if the people at Parks and Recreation who work with us on our asset intelligence systems, or the people at Health, or the people at Office of Emergency Management, or Law and Legal, or the Mayor's Office, or City Council need that, it shouldn't just be the ability to gather and display that information. That's great. And the reporting on it, it's great. But there has to be an ability to make that intelligible across many different groups, planning and emergency management and health, and all of those places require the use of that. And it can't just go through one person or a small team. They too, all of these other departments, need to be educated in the way that we can utilize that. So, using these principles, IWAMs and Envision, were used to deliver critical building information and also collect response costs. And I'll cover that a little bit later in the presentation. So let me give you a brief history of asset management. Let's drop back 8-9 years ago. Our pain point was back in the early 2010s. We didn't exactly know what we had, where we were studying. We didn't know how to gather that kind of information. You went to the guy. And we all know that every department had a guy. And I'm using that term generically. It could be man or woman. And therein lies the issue. Everyone had a single point of contact or a smaller amount of contact. And in this 2012 asset management study, whom we call the Tom Knox study, where he was the head of the planning commission at the city, what Tom Knox began to discover is that the city didn't know where its assets are, how much they spent on them, or more accurately, why they spent money on certain things. You could always track down, you could always make an inquiry, you could always get the data eventually. But that isn't exactly a smart way to run a city. It's not a very intelligent way to create the data that people need when they need it most to make actionable decisions. So after that Tom Knox study, the Department of Planning begins to digest it, begins a procurement process to go and implement asset management in the city, along with some degree of building information modeling. The result are twofold. One, the Integrated Workplace Asset Management System, IWAMS, and as a part of that, more like a sister or cousin application, we had a CAD to GIS to BIM system called Envision. And you'll see a little bit of that in a sec. This was implemented first in 2016 and 2017. I came on board with the city in April of 2017, and we update that periodically with it could be upgrades and improvements to the software. We also have a geodatabase that handles what we call the master facilities database, and that in turn has that gets updated quarterly as we offline some assets, we online some others. By the way, when we say assets in the city, I should stress this: our assets are at generally the building level. We have sites which are a collection of assets. We do not, in our asset management efforts, get down to something like the hammer level, the vehicle level. We do, however, have or are about to implement a linked inventory and workshop management effort that will link in with asset management. So when you want to get down to, say, the tool or vehicle or equipment level effort, we are in the process of integrating that in the next step. But when I talk about assets here, they're generally at the building level or something you may spend capital dollars on. So this is our current state. We have IWAMS and Envision, as I mentioned. It includes three what I call semi-integrated web-based applications. The reason why they're semi-integrated is they all exist on the same server, but there's not flow between the two that's natural. They're hosted applications right now rather than truly a SaaS environment, though I think the next generation of this will be true SaaS. They are cloud hosted and they can be utilized across anybody who has a viable login. Each one application has its own login and sign on applications. So if I were to log into IWAMS or Envision or a or the analytics and charts and reporting tool, all of those have separate login instances. So even though they could be the same exact login, with the username and the password, they do require three separate login instances. A little bit kludgy, but we're dealing with that now. The map-based system, which I'll show in a moment, allows for selection of one or more assets by capital, operating, meaning work order, and energy expenditures and or statuses. In the case of capital and operating, we do have means of integrating project status. The problem is particularly with capital, we don't have a really great data feed into it. So it's like having a container that's empty. We're in the process of getting that upgraded. We're in a procurement process, and that will be integrated as our capital budget and capital projects software come online. The chart and graph system allows for detailed system analysis. We can break things down, we can generate reports, we can provide, we can slice and dice the data in multiple fashions. This is in the process of an upgrade as well to a new system called NavCRE, produced by NGKF. That's Newmark Grove Knight Frank. They're a London-based massive real estate developer who bought our original contractor to this. And that chart and graph system can give some pretty nice breakdowns, and I'll show a little bit of that later. The CAD to GIS to building information modeling application, referred to as Envision, provides detailed CAD and space use analysis. And this is really important. Having your CAD data is great. We should all have our CAD data, and I really appreciate that, especially when they're geo-rectified, they're put into building information modeling. We can do things like vacancy and occupancy. We can address certain things within COVID, but the ability to just have your CAD is kind of a dummy system. Having the ability to analyze those spaces at a square footage level to determine their use, how they're going to be utilized in any given situation, and some downstream, like how what happens if these things are offline, what happens if you do configuration, can we come up with some spatial analyses that work with that? All of those things would be really nice to have and are critical, I think, to next generation building information modeling. So get a little more detailed look at our Envision system, because I know with this local effort, this becomes really important for both how we choose to use our assets and the way we demonstrate them across our city. Something that's critical to understand, a building information modeling is not just CAD on the web. It's democratizing building information and then providing a framework for analysis to solve many different kinds of problems. I think that's something where a lot of people see building information modeling as a way to get CAD and maybe some basic data on that. You have to almost take a step back and take a look at the way in which you organize your buildings and the way in which you organize your workspaces, because every month people come to the Department of Public Property, well, we need more space. And it used to be that if a place said we're hiring 40 more people, give us 40 more spaces, that would just, they'd find a way. Now with building information modeling, we can go take a look at the spaces and say, hey, look, you've got 8 underutilized conference rooms. You have a gigantic storage place for papers that are 40 years old. Can we Iron Mountain that? It's a way of looking at building information modeling and working with your people who need your asset management and your building information modeling working together to say, hey, look, maybe it's time you changed your business processes a little bit. And then you want to build a rapport and make it work back and forth. You don't just want to tell them, oh, I'm sorry, you don't have, you've got plenty of extra space, because they've been doing a system or the way they workflow over the years. That's what they're used to. That's what they've developed, so people uh, expect to see. So when you're asking them to change their business process to work with you as an asset management or property management person, when you are doing that, you're asking people to change their thought patterns and to understand that the way they've always been doing something may not be the best way. And you'll find some resistance to that. We find that all the time when people are just used to going out, hey, we've got this request for lease, let's just go do it. It's like, well, do they need it? So you can frustrate a few people, and that's okay. But as you build those rapport and those business processes, and you get to be seen as the person who helps them build the best possible business scenario for their space, that's when you become viewed as a solution provider. So, in sharing that information across users in multiple disciplines within government, people can use it as they see fit. So, we have some groups that use this for emergency management. We have some groups that use this for space planning. We have some groups that use this because we need to track our vacancy and occupancy. We have several groups that use this just from a one group in law, use this because we want to reduce our risk exposure from our building design. There's all kinds of ways to look at this. Tailoring that data to your end users based on their role is what I call the ultimate expression. If I've got law, I can tailor my use with a good asset intelligence and CAD to GIS to BIM system. I can tailor that data specifically to what they need based on their role and their ability to convert that information into actionable policy or changes that need to be made. I probably get on the order of 15 requests a year from law saying, hey, is this our property? Did we do this particular work, and are we potentially liable? In return, because we know where our liabilities are and our potential for lawsuit, we've been able to roughly deflect about working together with law and ourselves in terms of analyzing some of these data. We've been able to reduce our net exposure about $1.5 million per year. So in and of itself, it provides the framework, I think, for understanding, not just from understanding how CAD and GIS and BIM and asset management work together, but also how to provide value across the enterprise. And I'll give you one real world example that just happened. By being able to track down work orders at a city building, we were able to determine that work being done at this one building left us potentially liable to a lawsuit from 2 years ago. In this case, it was a workers' comp. We were able to show how that particular work order and that particular requested work order within the building framework was not germane to that person's injury. Now, I don't know the exact result of that, but by putting it that way, we've been able to stop things such as nuisance lawsuits. In addition, because we can use some of our imagery software, we've also managed to find out when we are and are not owners of a certain property, because in the city of Philadelphia, you own all the way to the street's edge. So if it's public or if it's private, or who is in charge of the utility hole cover, all of those things are part of what we can analyze. So using that information, not just for, of course, in this case, initial lawsuits, but also using that information for emergency response means having that on-demand knowledge for an on-demand situation. And I'll cover this in COVID and maybe look a little bit at flooding later. So I'm going to take one step back here for just a moment, see if there's any questions. Also, by the way, Um, I'm about to launch a poll that says, do you use CAD or building information modeling with emergency management? And over in the chat, if anybody wants to put in, does anybody here have a question? Um, Please feel free to go ahead and say it now before I hop back into the presentation. Figure I'll take like a 2-minute catch up because I've thrown a lot of information at people. Also, feel free to utilize the Q&A as well if you're interested. Okay. Excellent. Got a few responses here. Appreciate that one. Excellent. All right. And thank you for those who responded. So far, everyone who's responded has said yes, that they utilize CAD or building information modeling with emergency management, which is great. Appreciate that. I will go ahead and here. All right. I'm going to continue. So here's some examples of our building information and how we integrated building information asset management in the time of COVID-19. So back in April, as we had been on complete city shutdown, emergency and necessary essential workers only were to report to work. I was working from home, as was my entire unit. And we were told, stay home until we know what the heck it is or we have a vaccine. And a lot of us at that time did not expect the length of time that COVID has stuck around. Most of us thought 2 or 3 months, whatever, we'll come back. Well, now here it is, 7 months later, and I'm still working out of my office upstairs. So it's been a greater challenge. And finally in April, as we begin to sort of work out, well, how are we going to plan our returns to work? Because a lot of people still need to work at the city. Some of us, even though we have we have a VPN system and we have security and all that, some of us do not have, some of us have to come in. Some codes enforcement workers, essential, obviously police and fire and EMTs. So they all have to work in the city and deliver on critical, vital services. So we had a hypothesis. 36 square feet, i.e. 6 feet. Remember when people said you have to stay 6 feet or more away from someone because of COVID spread? Well, 36 square feet was our workplace, or less workspace was not occupiable, and anything else could be. But we found out by doing some ground truthing with our CAD system, by walking these areas, we found out this wasn't necessarily the case. High walls can protect some small cubicles if there's adequate passing space. So if you've got sort of a series of cubicles that don't have adequate passing space or close to a wall, something like that, then it probably won't work. But some high-walled small cubicles, if you have people spaced out enough, and there is adequate more than 6 foot away passing space from between them and a wall where you can direct traffic away from the cubes, they might actually work out okay. Low-walled large cubicles, particularly those near high traffic and passing areas, may be more dangerous. Shared office spaces. We found this one out. We had a lot of places that had 200 square foot offices with 2 people in it, but there was no barriers and there was no protection. So they might have a shared office, but there was no way to keep it safe, even though it was greater than 36 square feet per person. Shared open spaces and shared keyboards need a wipe down policy. We had a lot of that in our IT groups. A lot of people share network monitors, but also our codes enforcement officers all share a um, common keyboards to enter codes enforcement data. All of them, and they all share a common space. They don't have um, their own computers. So that means that all of those commonly shared areas need a wipe down policy. Any places like that need a new cleaning policy. There needs to be, and you have to understand how you're tracking that. When did those clean out occur? What happened? God forbid you have an outbreak. You track that, and do you track your cleaning processes? All of these things we were able to incorporate into our building information modeling and our asset management system. I'll show you in a second. So this is how we used our Envision system, and this is one sample. When we were beginning to reoccupy our spaces. The purple or fuchsia coloration here, those places indicate that places that absolutely could not be occupied. They were too exposed, too small, too close to high end. The other ones that we had could be, according to our processes, could be available for occupancy depending. Now, this was obviously before we started having people more regularly come into work. So this map has changed since then. But this is just showing back in late September an example of a floor plan where we could figure out by looking at this where potential exposure and risk sites were. So, relating it back to our asset management system, collecting information on COVID-19 expense. First, we gathered information. We had we had Excel documents that were some of it were stored in. We had PDFs of bills. We had invoices in various formats. The second thing we did is add our asset IDs by matching up the building or address. We have a lot of field crew that would enter what they saw as their common terminology, or they'd enter an address that didn't match up with our master facilities database address, because they were commonly known as that, or they would enter a corner of the state and Maine. So instead, what we had to do was make sure that the building addresses that were given to our colleagues on the COVID-19 cleaning side, make sure that those asset IDs matched the proper building address and that we were getting the right place, right time. This required some manual cleanup. This is any of these data that we see, there's going to be a manual cleanup process, at least for the first quarter or so that you're gathering some of this, especially if you're gathering field data, until such time as you can put it into like a survey 1, 2, 3 or somewhere where you restrict the data fields. But a lot of times during emergency management situations, you're taking the data any way you can get and then having to do the manual cleanup as you can. So then you calculate the needed info. We were able to take all of those cleaning expenses, tag them to a special work order ID, and then calculate the price per square foot. That becomes really critical because later on, people are going to want to see the cost you had for cleaning up for COVID, for paying attention to how much your expenses are, because inevitably after an emergency, there's always people that are scouting government. How did the government spend it? Were they watching the dollars? What got abused, et cetera, et cetera. And all of us in government know that politics plays a role, particularly in an election year. So calculating that needed info on price per square foot, really critical for us. And then we were able to upload it to IWAMS. We sent the data as we got it for a vendor. It wound up being three fairly sizable Excel spreadsheets over a couple of months that we were then able to do. And now we have geolocated expenses for every one of the places uh, we spent money on COVID cleaning for. So that keeps us. That's how we use our asset management system and our CAD to GIS to BIM system. Here's another one that we had to do. This is a different building that we had to put up. This is the Curtis Center where we rent the third floor, and we had to plan out our new occupancy like you saw before. But this is a new asset. We hadn't ever put the Curtis Center into our building information model. City has over 950 buildings. We hadn't gotten to this one yet. So we were able to take the CAD, spin it up, get that inserted, and then do our occupancy planning by detecting certain hotspots. You can probably see those little yellowish dots in the middle. Those were determined to be particular hotspots due to their exposure. So we were able to say, hey, you can't utilize these. A lot of the places that look fairly small have fairly high walls. We were able to determine that they were safe in passage. But the ones that violated our city policy, we were able to offline those, and we were able to provide this to the people who managed that building. Again, we didn't have this asset when we started the project. We were able to spin it up and get the analysis within a couple of days. This potentially not only does it lower our legal risk exposure, but it can also potentially save lives. And ultimately, we have to look at this at a time where COVID-19 is a pandemic. And in certain cases, it will cost money, but in a lot of cases, it can potentially cost someone's life. So you want to take that with the best view of protecting the people that you work with and for. Now, here's another type of viewer that we have. And this is spinning up our test site down in South Philly where we had the walk-in sites. Now, one of the key parts about this is that you come in here, if you look on the south end of this map, there is that's the road near the stadium. You come in there, you've got a drive-through entry point. So you come in from southeast to northwest, you enter, you drive through, you pass through certain tents. These are all testing sites. And then you come in, we've got a supply drop-off. We've got staffing and support areas. We were able to spin this up in a few days. This gives us our places to test this, and because we could tag it to our asset IDs. Again, not only did we have the design up, we had the asset IDs up. We were able to show what we spent money on. All of these sub operations here that OEM needed, we were able to tag this, and because we were able to spin it up as an asset ID, we were able to track everything as it happened. We were able to show how much we spent at spinning up this asset, this new spun up testing site, and then when it was time to spin it, wind it down, we could move it into our offline. We have a secondary database for offline or decremented assets, and we still have the electronic paper trail, as it were, to track and follow those assets and keep that design so that if we ever needed to do it again, we have it ready. So, by the way, the city of Philadelphia did win a High Performance Operations Award winner from Cartograph. This is an actual look at the South Philly testing site as it happened. It was drive up. You can see one of the city workers there in the front helping out with how to do this testing. And some of the tents that you saw before, which I will show you up here. Some of those tents that you saw over in this red zone, that's what you saw right there. This is the design, this is the CAD type analysis that then leads to this. And we were able to get all of our asset expenditures, we're able to track it. And by the way, that has a huge effect because one of the things we can do with that is when FEMA comes to us for reimbursement, they're going to ask, well, what did you spend on COVID? Should this get approval for FEMA expenditures and emergency management and PEMA dollars? Pennsylvania's analog to FEMA. All of those things we're going to be required to document. This is the way that we are able to document this system. And that means that the city long term can save some money. Long term, we have the ability to track every asset, every expenditure that went into this. And I think that that's critical. We all of us think that that's critical, not just from a public health and public expenditure standpoint, but so that we have this knowledge kept and democratized, and we can do it again and again. Hopefully, we don't have to deal with another once a century pandemic, but this can be the same thing for a hurricane strike. It could be any kind of emergency, infrastructural issues. We had an explosion at South Philly refinery. Thankfully, we didn't happen to have this kind of injury where we required sort of massive response. But all of these things are now ready for utilization. And that's another important part that I think asset management has in terms of what we've been able to do with it. It's not just trackable, it's not just reportable, it's repeatable. And I think that's really something that you have to drive home. If you can keep these specialty asset management efforts and you know what you did for them, then the next time this comes around, we have the ability to track that sort of asset, understand what it's going to cost, and maybe have thrown an inflation factor because it's 10 years down the road or whatever. But right then and there, you can follow up what you had before and use it again. And I think that really is the key part of asset intelligence. You know where you were, you know where you are, and you begin to get together some predictive analysis of where you might be in any given situation. So, one that for COVID modeling. Next step, what about flood modeling? And again, it's the same kind of principle. We're going to be looking at combining 3D views, 3D CAD through the Revit type of modeling, potentially Revit. I don't want to bias, we could have another one, along with scanning and similar efforts, doing that 3D work with combine that with slosh and FEMA modeling. So now you get an idea with your 3D scans. Well, where does the flood hit? How much potential damage? What are we looking at? 100, 500 year, 1,000-year floods. Estimating potential damage from doing that. What happens if it hits this building? How much does it cost? What do we have to do to harden or mitigate those circumstances? And if a flood does hit, how much in our work order and our capital management have we used? What's our exposure? How much does it cost? What were we able to do ahead of time to prevent that? So we can measure our insurable loss, our preventable losses, and our recovery time. That's another part. How long does it take to put that building back online? Late last year, about a year ago, we had a fire. It took us about 3 weeks to do the repairs. It was a network closet through a spark into some flammable substance. I don't know the whole details. And we were able to offline that area, which was about a corner. It was 2 floors and a corner. We were able to offline that place, get people moved over to other places temporarily. We were able to track the expenditures, capital and operating, for those repairs, and be able to assign it to potentially our fire insurance, saying this is how much we spent, down to the square foot, down to the nickel, down to the item. And I think that has a lot of power. But putting that back up for flood modeling, now we know what's insurable, what's not. Are we in the flood zone? What could we have prevented? What could we have hardened? And more importantly, every lost minute is also lost dollars. When you have to move someone, FEMA doesn't cover the time it takes you to move someone. So our ability to hypothetically put someone in a new workplace, or be able to create a understanding of what it would be to move 20, 30, 50, 100 people, that means that's less time planning and more time we can either respond to it or prevent it by using certain mitigation tools. When you democratize 3D building information modeling with the login system that we have. Everyone can see it and utilize their own building information modeling for response and cost models. In other words, OEM can use it for and apply that data. It's Office of Emergency Management. Public property can do that. Public health can do that. Law can do that. By giving each person the ability to access that, they can run the type of scenarios and modeling they need for predictive analysis of expenses and for what the city should and should not do to potentially respond to an emergency. So I do want to go over some forward-looking documents because I want people to understand where asset management not only is with the city, but the future. And I think it's really important to plan out what you want to do with asset management as it moves forward. It's never just a one-day process. It's never something you decide to do and then that's good enough. You should always be looking to improve within, we take a 5-year, kind of a 5-year approach. You should always be looking to improve in that time, but also every 5 years, take some time, reassess what you're doing, and understand that things change. The market for asset management, building information modeling, CAD on the web, all that stuff, the difference between 2015 and 2020, 2021 is massive. It's generationally or an order of magnitude different. It simply isn't the same. And so every 5 years, at the very least, you should be reviewing what your asset management tool is. Does it still meet the needs you have? And if it's still meeting the needs, have you gone out and reevaluated those needs? So these are some important points to consider when looking at asset management into the future. So we look at a GIS-based, cross-functional graphical user interface that delivers on the following. That means the map is sort of the driver. It's the quarterback, or the as it will, if you want a sports analogy. It's the main bit. So you click on that, on a asset, a functional asset within that map, and then it brings up the following. All possible sub-applications that are related to it. So if you've got a building and you want to look at building information modeling CADs or 3Ds or operational expenditures, you click on that and boom, those possibilities are there. If you want to be able to click report, boom, out comes out of the map to this is the report on our energy expenditures. This is a report on our capital expenditures by budget section, or however you want to break it down. And I do want to stress this. How you slice and dice the data should be within your business process. So you should be able to configure your reporting and needs. Those should be configurable on your end, not on the vendor's end. So, and we had some issues with that with our first kind of halting steps onto this. A lot of this was customized by the vendor rather than configurable on our end. The maximum reasonable configurability should be something you should be able to work towards. So, integrated storeroom, inventory, and work order management sub-applications can be integrated. So if I click the work order management system and I look at a work order from this driver application, and I look at the work order management system that pops up a new tab, I should also be able to see what's the storeroom now that we've drawn on that? What's the inventory that we've drawn on? Do I need to order more parts? What's the status of the work order? Is it completed? Is it not? And does that information get routed to the right people? Asset management is not separate from storeroom, inventory, or work order management, and it is not separate from building information modeling. All of them are integrated in a way that all flows naturally within a business process. And if you leave them as separate, you're going to wind up having data gaps where, again, you have to go to that person where you've got a potential bottleneck or a silo, or if that person retires or leaves their position, you wind up relearning. So instead, what I view as critical is asset management can be your driver, but it should be integrated across several applications. We're going to be looking to CAD and GIS to build information modeling similar to our current applications, probably a lot more integrated, but similar in capacity for right now. And then finally, integrated data feeds from our capital, energy expenditure, capital budget and program, capital project analysis, which we have a separate ArcGIS online tool that does our capital project analysis for police and fire, and our climate data because we work with the Trust for Public Land to create a climate data analysis tool, and we don't have that data. So we spent roughly between the capital project analysis and the climate data tool, we spent roughly $275,000, and we don't have any of those data integrated with our capital budget or our asset management. So, in other words, I would have to spring up, if I wanted to look at my capital project analysis for fire and police stations, I would have to spring up a whole other application. It's unintegrated to what we've done. So let's say we are doing some capital project analysis and that data is from 2017. But in the interim, we've put on a new roof, we've fixed the HVAC, and we've added a whole bunch of new windows. Well, that changes the conditions of the capital projects of the buildings in which you might want to put in a capital project. So you're limited to the 2017 or whenever you last did a capital, whenever you last did a building condition analysis, and you haven't added in all of those capital budget and capital program and work order expenditures. So that's coming forward. We figure we need to add that and then update the building condition rating for every place we have a work order or a capital expenditure taken on. And then on top of that, the city spent significant money, along with the help of the Billy Penn Foundation, on getting our climate change data or global warming, or whatever you're going to call it. I don't want to politicize that. The climate change, rising of the waters, well, we're looking at potential issues. So, with that change, how do we want to increase more green space? Do we want, because parks are participatory in this, do we want to include more tree cover? Do we need more permeable surfaces? Do we need, if the surface is impermeable, do we want to run water underneath that? And by the way, our asset management system includes all of our ground stormwater infrastructure projects. So subsurface treatments. We've got all kinds of looking at that, but they're not, again, these things aren't integrated with some of our climate change data, with some of the efforts that we already spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on. So now that these have been deemed to be important, we're going to add those back in. And we're going to make sure that those considerations that we spent all that time analyzing, but have sat out in the shelf, now we're going to feed them back in. By the way, I will say this much. There are three kinds of data lifts we've seen. The manual kind, where we get an old CSV, delimited text file, and we make changes for it and we upload it, and that happens. But if you can get a full API, process application program interface, where your data sources can talk to each other without having to do a lot of human touch, that really saves you a ton of time. So all of these integrated applications really do thrive off the APIs. Secondly, if you can't do that, an automated extract, transform, and load process, which we do right now with our current work order system, which is being replaced in this 2.0 movement. That work order system does have a nightly extract, transform, and load. That is a little bit kludgy, but it gets done. But ideally, going forward, we would want the APIs to get everything to speak to one another, and this creates a truly integrated system. So, I appreciate it. By the way, thank you for listening to me talk for about 50 odd minutes on the basics of how we do things. I'm going to open it up for questions. Okay. Anybody have questions? Feel free to stick in the chat or the Q&A. Okay. Not seeing any questions at the moment. People can still hear me, right? I guess so. All right. I am going to do a little plug. Okay. I am going to do a little plug. By the way, if you want this, I can happily send it to you. I'm also going to put into the chat my email. But I'm also going to do a little plug for an organization which I belong to called MACURISA. Oh, we do have a question. Oh, Jeff, great question. The short answer to that is yes. We do actually, we contemplated adding two types of linear assets, streets and water. Water, obviously, for pipes and underneath stuff, subsurface treatments, which we did recently add our ground stormwater infrastructure. And we also added a very large section for streets. That includes streets, street projects, light poles because they own those, and 4G, 5G rollout. So we do have that capability. The bigger question has been getting Streets' massive level of data in. We're working with them on that. We have a good relationship with the Streets Department. And in that regard, this is going to be probably a 1 or 2 year data lift. They have God knows how many millions of feet off the top of my head, but we're working on that together. I think the first thing we're going to do is projects with them, areas of project, and then we're going to add in all the street level detail. But thank you. Great question. Okay. By the way, all right, while we're waiting for the questions, if quick little plug for MACURISA, which my colleague Sarah Taylor would have been here to do a little of the presentation. But for those of you who don't know, URISA has a national group of geospatial, landscape architects, bathymetrists, all kinds of people that deal with a lot of the public space of land use, including a lot of GIS people, but also engineers, anyone who's dealing in the public space for that. And we have a very dedicated organization that works across Eastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and we're all a part of that. I am a board member. I'm a trustee, and I did want to encourage all because it gets a lot of people together who are interested in asset management, who are interested in building information modeling, and it's a great way to spend time with fellow professionals in that regard. I have a lot of colleagues who are participatory in that, but it also gives me a chance to review a lot of the market. I know you've probably seen all the folks from various and sundry conferences. I'm sure many of you who are in engineering have your own set, but I do highly encourage anyone who's in that public civil engineering, GIS, landscape architecture space to consider checking that out because I think there's a lot of value in this kind of asset management data and working across several professional groups, both public, private, nonprofit, university. So if you are interested and you are in those areas, I absolutely would encourage you all to check it out. We do get a lot of people across from all kinds, small cities, small towns, villages, large cities, governments of all kinds. We've got university sectors, private, and not just vendors, but other people who are interested in developing their private sector abilities and ways to reach out and learn. And so I highly encourage that as well. So that's my plug for MACURISA. Does anybody else have any other questions, ideas, thoughts, things that came to mind, things I can do better? Well, if not, I could give you a little bit back at time, a little bit back some time of your day. If you've got further questions you didn't want to bring to my attention now or you think of later, I've put my email in the chat box. I'm always happy to talk shop, as it were. I really appreciate everyone's time. And in that case, I'll leave it here for people to chat a little while longer. And but after that, we're pretty much set to go. If you want to head out. Yep. Okay. Next session does start at 1:45. So if you want to take your time, go grab some lunch. That's what I'm going to do, or similar. And I really appreciate everyone's time. And I hope everyone gets to stay safe and healthy, and that we all get a chance to see each other next conference. All right. Take care, everyone.